Hi, everybody. Welcome to our introduction to our critical thinking course. So we'll discuss what critical thinking is and why it's kind of important to study this. So let's take a look at just the title here, critical thinking, and we can take a look at the two words, critical and thinking, and figure out what this might mean. So critical refers to involving or exercising careful judgment or observation. And when we think about thinking, thinking refers to using one's mind to consider or reason something. So you can see then that when we look at what it means to think critically, we're trying to be careful about what it is we are considering. It's about being uh, careful about what it is we believe. So, in a general sense, then, what we're studying in our class is thinking carefully. So, why is this sort of thing important? Well, hopefully, it's obvious to you why it's important to think carefully about something. But often in life, it's easy to get fooled into believing things that aren't true, and this can often lead to making mistakes and judgments. And when we are making choices and decisions, uh, we often don't think carefully. And in fact, what we do is we often are persuaded to believe something based upon emotion or based upon our psychology, right? This is what rhetoric is about. And we'll learn more about rhetoric through our course. So then, thinking carefully is hopefully going to allow us to make better decisions and try to, and it should help us to make better choices when faced with certain problems, uh, give us better solutions to dealing with those problems. And I'm sure a whole host of other things you can think of as to why it's important to think carefully about something. Now, in order to get a sense for this, really, it might be useful to think about times when we haven't thought carefully. Can you think of an example when you had behaved foolishly or made a bad judgment or had been persuaded into a poor decision or were persuaded to believe something that you later figured out or determined was obviously not true? This is something that you were supposed to have done for your discussions this week, right? Any sort of example when you said to yourself, ah, gosh, that was stupid, would work here too. Okay, take a second to think about that. Let's say you are starting a business. How good would it be if you followed this sort of philosophy for your business? Sell products where there's less competition. So if you have tennis rackets that you made and you're in a place that has lots of tennis racket companies, maybe you might want to move to a place where there are less tennis racket companies that are competing against you. Well, that seems to be a relatively sound sort of philosophy. But can we see how maybe following this sort of philosophy for all situations may not be the best thing to do? You can imagine somebody who is a heater salesman and they follow this sort of edict, sell products where there's less competition. And that leads them to a place like the desert, where there's obviously less competition, but what they may neglect to realize is that there's also less customers for your product. Or think about this person moving to this town, Lost Springs, that has a population of one person. Again, less competition, but nobody to sell your product to. Well, this sort of thinking is an example of a heuristic or some sort of cognitive bias. And you read about this for your readings this week. But in general, what we're talking about are shortcuts, right? They're kind of rules of thumb that our minds use to quickly come to a judgment, come to a decision, without actually thinking it through carefully, right? So following a rule like, it's always better to sell your product in a place where there's less competition. It may work. It may be a useful way of coming to a decision on where you sell your product quickly, right? An easy way to come to that sort of choice. In fact, all heuristics, all cognitive biases give us a way to quickly come to a judgment, allow us to quickly come to a decision without having to think carefully about the situation. And that can be useful when time is of the essence, and when you're dealing with decisions that, for the most part, the heuristic works. The cognitive bias allows you to move on. Right? You don't want to analyze your doorknob every time you walk to a door. You don't have that much time to spend continually analyzing doorknobs to determine whether or not there's germs, to determine whether or not they'll work, to determine whether or not the doorknob will bite you back when you touch it. You need a shortcut that says, yeah, doorknobs are meant for turning, and that allows me to go through. Right? Think about the last time you sat down in a chair. Did you carefully inspect the chair to see that it would actually hold your weight before you sat on it? No, in your mind you have this heuristic that says, chairs are for sitting, so you sit down on them. You can't spend all your time analyzing every chair that you're about to sit on to see if it'll actually hold your weight. It's kind of a waste of time. So heuristics, cognitive biases have their place. They allow us to make choices and decisions quickly, but there are some times, if not a lot of times, where it's useful to slow down and think carefully about what it is that we're doing. And that might have been sound advice for these people. These are two famous people, Nicolas Cage and Allen Iverson. Do you know what they have in common? Besides being male, besides being famous, they both also had a lot of money and then lost it. So here's a article. How did Nicolas Cage blow through a $150 million fortune? So somehow Nicolas Cage has a magical ability to turn even the most simple and straightforward roles into incredibly awkward ones. Therefore, it seems only appropriate that his finances are also incredibly awkward. Nicolas Cage, known to his friends and family as that weird dude who's always in the house talking to himself, filed for bankruptcy. By the way, take this article with a grain of salt. Filed for bankruptcy recently after it was revealed that he owes $6 million in unpaid taxes. Yes, that's right, $6 million. What I really like is this line of the article. He had a penchant for spending tons of money on really stupid things like $300,000 dinosaur skulls. Okay, think about the type of thinking that goes into spending $150 million, right? Without uh, paying attention to, what would be left, like nothing. Allen Iverson was able to go through his $154 million of NBA earnings. Another famous individual, Warren Sapp, was a football player. He also lost a lot of money. Now, when we say lost, we mean, through spending. Now, what sort of thinking is this? Well, most likely it's not them thinking carefully about their spending choices. It's most likely the result of impulsive behavior or a delusional sense of one's wealth. Uh, Most likely, these are all choices, or these are all the results of choices from emotional um, sort of places, right? These are probably all emotionally driven sort of behaviors that led to them losing their money. And oftentimes, emotions can get in the way of us thinking carefully about something. You can imagine if they had thought more carefully about their bank accounts, if they had thought more carefully about spending habits, given themselves an opportunity to check out how much money they had left before each time they spent, maybe they would have not lost all of that money. Um, Here is a story of a man who police had caught urinating in public. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, well, what sort of thinking was involved in deciding to urinate in public? Maybe not so much, or at the very least, maybe not critical thinking. So the police chased this person, and just as absurd is that this person starts running away from the cops. Again, maybe not the most thoughtful of decisions. So as the police are chasing this man, um, the police are led to neighborhoods, and they're running through homes or around homes. And as they're running, they notice a garage that was wide open. And in the garage was a man who was packing large bags of marijuana. Again, maybe not the smartest thing to do while packing your marijuana is to have your garage door open, especially when this was illegal at the time. Here, the police noticed that or caught a mom who let her 9-year old drive to school because he begged her. Again, you have to ask yourself what sort of thinking went into the decision to let your 9-year old drive to school. Most likely not thinking very carefully about the issue. By the way, this kid had begun driving the family car when he was 5 years old. So again, we take a look at these sorts of behaviors. Obviously, this sort of thinking is not very long term, right? You're not thinking about long term consequences. It's about convenience. It's about short sightedness, expediency. It's about not thinking carefully about all the consequences of one's actions. And though these may be, situations that cause you to chuckle a little bit, they're kind of dangerous situations. If you have a kid driving a car at such a young age, you can't really expect them to be proficient at doing that, and you're risking the lives of the people that are around them. So, one last example. There was this movie made that highlighted this individual who led groups of people towards the idea that you don't need food, material food, substance to live. Instead, what he told them was that you can get all that you need from simply staring directly into the sun. Now imagine you are listening to somebody say to you, "Look, I know you feel hungry, but you don't need to eat that salad. All you need to do is stare at the sun, and that would be enough to nourish your body." Now, obviously, you hopefully are wary of the idea that the sun might damage your eyes. But you can also imagine how damaging it would be to not eat and simply stare at the sun. So, as a result of people following this individual and not thinking carefully about what he's teaching them, some people died. So, thinking carefully is a really important skill to avoid silly mistakes and behaviors that could be detrimental to yourself and to other people. So, what sort of thinking is this? Well, it could be a fallacy. A fallacy is like a fake reasoning, right? Reasoning that sounds like an argument really isn't. Referred to as wishful thinking, right? People wanted to believe this was true, so they believed it was true. This can be very dangerous. So, when we think about careful thinking or thinking carefully, you may not be faced with a person that's telling you, hey, you should believe that eating or that you don't need to eat and that staring at the sun is fine. You may not be faced with, you may not think very long about the decision on whether or not to allow a 9-year old to drive. But you do have very important questions that I'm sure you'll be faced with throughout your life, including, how do you spend your time? You probably have lots of goals and things you desire and things that give you joy. Well, when you take a look at your days, are you spending your time in a way that really promotes what you want out of life? Or are you dedicating your days to things and to doing things simply because, people tell you that's what you should do, simply because that's what mom and dad tell you that's what you should do? How are you spending your time? Have you thought carefully about what it is you do with your time? If you are living in a democratic society, you are the government, you are the state. What happens to the state, what happens to the country is based upon your votes. Do you think carefully about what you vote for? Or do you vote based upon what your friends say or what your Twitter feed says? Where do you spend your money? Money is something that many of us focus our lives around. Right? We work really hard in order to earn money because we think it's important. Well, once you get it, where do you use it? Are you using it in a way that will provide you with a type of life you like, or are you spending based upon impulse, as we saw with some of our celebrity friends? You are in school, and supposedly, hopefully, you'll be using this as a way to get a degree. Well, what are you supposed to major in? Have you thought carefully about that? Have you thought carefully about where you want to go after college, or what even the point of college is for you? So, in a broader sense, have you thought about the question of what it is you want to do for a living and what you want to do with your life? These are really important questions. And the point of the course, as I briefly discussed in the orientation, is for you to get the skills so that when you look at your life, you can think carefully about how it is you'd like to live it, rather than just live it based upon how everybody else is telling you should live it. So hopefully this will give you some skills that you could use to better evaluate where you're going, whether it's really where you want to go, and how it is to get there.